people from season 1, we have people who started in season 4, we have people who were until the end. So we've got a good breadth of the show here because, and I want to ask, particularly Rick, I think you span both eras. The show, I don't know if people know this, but the show had different, as they call them, showrunners for seasons 1 through 4, and then seasons 5 through 7. And so I've had people ask me, why are the later seasons so different? Why are they more surreal? Why are they, they really go for harder jokes, and the earlier seasons maybe don't do that, and they maybe are more character. I mean, I think that's a gross exaggeration, because I certainly can think of great character moments in the later seasons too. But it's because there were different people at the helm, right? So, what do you think, Rick, about what the tone of the show was like in both of those eras? Because you started season 4 and kept on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, it was a very different. I can't speak to the tone. I mean, it was always, the girls were always great. The scripts were always strong. But I did know that it was run very differently. For instance, in the first 4 seasons, the original showrunners, Spear and Grossman and Nathan Infinaro, they didn't have a room. They didn't have a writer's room. They just had...
we had a writer's room.
You did? Oh, well, this year they set us up to our offices, and they would send everybody...
They just didn't invite you.
No, because everybody would send jokes down, and we would have it in the beginning, but then go to our offices and completely, send the jokes down. And we did very well in that with those 4. And then the regime changed, and it was completely different. We were also baby writers too, and we'd never been in a room before, so it wasn't. We were kind of like, didn't excel as well in the next year.
Yeah. And anybody
But Jim
else?
was great.
Well, and Jim, you started in what year? Was it 5? 4. Oh, so you also...
No, 5.
Okay, I was gonna say, I thought you were in the newer regime. I want to go back to the very beginning. Some of the people who were there from the very beginning. Marcia was there from the very beginning, and I want to ask her in a minute about one of her contributions to the show that I love, that we all know so well. Isabel was there from right after the pilot, correct?
She fired Coco.
We're going to get to Coco. We have a lot to say about Coco.
I did the reshoots on the pilot.
Okay, so very early on.
Technically, I was there. As far as the difference between the two regimes, I always felt that the first 4 seasons were about discovery, that the first St. Olaf story, the first Picture It, how Stan was introduced, and that
The character, not me.
that the later seasons were about after so many Sophia stories, so many Rose stories, continuing to operate at such a high level. Some of the greatest stories out of Rose, I thought, came in the later seasons. I thought that they had the tougher job because everything was new early on.
Well, I was in the room when we were coming up with names of where Rose would be coming from. So we got a phone book. Those are these big books we used to have. With we came up with St. Olaf.
Wow.
But being there, I was there season 1, so it was discovery. Rose told long stories, and that's how we, take Susan's brilliant pilot and then just grow on that.
Yeah, to be there for the birth of St. Olaf, that's pretty amazing. The other person who was there in the very early days was Joel Thurm, because you were casting when they were casting the ladies, never mind guest stars, right? This was casting for the whole show.
The original,
I think you're sitting on one.
What?
Your microphone. or something similar.
You might
It'll
not
take about a
notice
half an
anymore.
hour to find. I don't want to know where it went.
I know when I'm sitting on the mic or not.
I wanted to talk about casting the ladies, and then we'll talk about Coco too, but the ladies particularly.
Well, is this thing on, by the way?
Yes.
Okay. There was one big problem with casting. My boss, Brandon Tartikoff, did not want B. Arthur, which created a big problem. But I never knew how dug in Susan was, because it just hadn't. I just wasn't in the room where those kind of discussions happened. So my job, according to Brandon, was to find someone that Susan would be happy with instead of B. Arthur. I should have realized that she wouldn't have been happy with anybody besides B. Arthur, but I was too naive, and I thought, oh, I have someone, her name is Elaine Stritch. She has the same acidic quality. She, you know, she could, you know, stare at you and give you the same thing that B does. I thought it was a good idea.
They both drank.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
No.
well, Stritch came in for her audition, and she talks about this in her shows that when she came in, I set her up in an office, and you know, whatever was there, and she said she was going to the restroom to freshen up a little bit, which I didn't know meant taking a couple of hits of vodka. So when she came in to read, and since you know none of the people associated with Golden Girls wanted her, so this woman had to walk into a freezer of an office and try to make it funny. Stritch asked Susan one thing, like something like, is it okay if I change something? And Susan said, yes, only the punctuation. There was no love in that word. You know, I felt so sorry for poor Stritch, because it wasn't her fault. She didn't do anything. And had I known that Susan was immovable on this, I wouldn't have done what I did and try to find somebody else. As it turned out.
I want to just say that I worked on a pilot, and Elaine Stritch was a guest star for one day. Before the day was half over, we were calling her Elaine Bitch.
I don't know, I thought that was what the character was supposed to be.
And she talked about it in her one-woman show too.
I know
went
she
through the
did.
whole-
She never got my
Don't
fucking
tell
name
them about the
right.
time you had Linda Hunt on the show. How did she call you?
She told me everything, but she never remembered my name.
Welcome to Hollywood.
No, but the only place it really counted was when they opened her show in LA. I wanted to be recognized from the stage of wherever it was downtown. And she forgot my name.
Well,
Anyway.
and Joel, you were there also for, first of all, the Betty and Rue switcheroo, and for Estelle coming in.
Well, I was there, but I had nothing to do with it. That was all Jay Sandrich, the director of the original Golden Girls, who basically reversed the characters of Rue and Betty. They were the opposite, and what do you call it? And what's his name? Just went out of my head. Jay figured that out. You all know what I'm talking about. I realize I may have been talking in circles, but you probably.
He's referring,
This
and I should have said in
crowd
the question. Yeah, I'm sure you all know if you came here tonight.
But I
that-
think people should remember, like, Susan Harris wrote on Maude, and she wrote the famous abortion episodes.
Oh, I didn't know.
So
Never
that
knew
one, she won an
Yeah.
Emmy for it too, I think. So, you know, that she had a connection with B.
Well, and that was one of the
B
reasons why.
also, at that time, there was something interesting in terms of numbers. There's something since I don't work anymore, I haven't heard TVQ scores and things like that. But there were two measurements. There was a measurement of how many people knew you, and then how many people liked you. So B. Arthur had like a 98% recognition because of all the work she'd done on television, but like a 10% likability. So it just, that's what Brandon was going by. And finally, I guess, I don't know, I didn't say this, I probably wasn't bright enough to say it, but someone also pointed out to Brandon, who was, unless he okayed everything, it wasn't gonna happen, that you may have had the most unliked person in the world with B. Arthur, but you also had the most liked person in the world with Betty White. So they sort of canceled each other. And it wasn't going to be the B. Arthur show, it was going to be the 4 ladies, or the 3.5 ladies. So,
Not the first time B and Betty would be exact opposites on any scale.
In season 3 of Soap, I was Susan Harris's writer's assistant, and during that season, we did the retrospective episode where B. Arthur played, was it God or was it St. Peter?
She was an angel at the halfway point when Jessica died. And so the retrospective was the review of the previous seasons before the beginning of the next season. So we were doing a retrospective, and B. Arthur was the angel at the halfway point.
And she was really good.
She was hilarious. I'll never forget, she was talking something about the Japanese people, and she said they think they're so smart they're still eating with sticks. Very well that the author delivered that one.
So I think B had another built-in advantage.
Well, and what I was getting at when I said the switcheroo, again, I think a lot of you know this, is that originally the concept based upon Rue having played kind of a mousier character on Maude and Betty having played the man-eater on the Mary Tyler Moore Show was that Betty would be Blanche and Rue would be Rose. And it's, I think, a combination of Jay Sandrich and the women scheming behind the scenes to get that reversed. Joel, I want to ask you, what was for meeting Estelle? She was a complete unknown quantity in Hollywood when you met her and when she got this role. What was that like? What was your impression of her?
Well, my impression is what you see in her performance was the impression. This woman walked in, she had done her homework. She came into audition with a little, and it's funny, I always thought that we used to call them pocketbooks in New York, leaving out the T on the first word. But she came with a little straw pocketbook and the hat. She had done her homework and gone out and prepared for the part. So when she came in, she was actually the first person set, really. You know, she came in, she auditioned, we all laughed hysterically, and that was that. I mean, that's the way things are supposed to happen. You know, and
Well, I just think it's so ironic that the unknown quantity playing the hardest role to cast, right, to find, technically you thought you were looking for an 80-something-year-old at the time, became the one person who never had any competition, and then all of the obvious choices like B and Betty and whatever are the ones where other people were up for those roles. It was the reverse of what you'd
But
expect.
isn't there a story that Estelle went to a vintage store and got the bag, and
supposedly,
because she came in before and you didn't see her in the part, and she came back dressed as an old lady?
well, I don't remember her coming in. I only remember her seeing her the way I described her. So anything that happened before, I don't know.
She had gotten a new manager, I think.
Mike?
She had gotten a new management at the time, and they told her to just go for it.
Siegel Green.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Marcia, I want to talk about a contribution that we all love to the show and that is part of every episode, because this will become even more relevant later when you see a special surprise that we're going to reveal. But Marcia, you put together one of the very first impression that we get of the Golden Girls. Tell us about that.
So we were we had 4 episodes in the can, but we weren't on the air yet. And Tony Thomas, one of the executive producers, said to me, you know, we've been taking meetings with these companies who specialize in doing main titles. That's all they do. And they're pitching us ideas, we're gonna take the ladies to Miami, we're gonna do helicopter shots, we're gonna do this, that. And they ranged in price from $20,000, $25,000 to $40,000 for less than a minute. And he said to me, you know, nothing's tweaking our propeller about all these pitches that we're getting. And I said, well, we have 4 episodes in the can. We already recorded the song with Cindy Fee, who, by the way, did it in 1 take.
Wow.
And why don't you let me just take all the raw footage into an edit bay with the song and let me just, you know, fuck around with all the material. And he said, okay, go ahead. And for the first time in the history of my relationship with Tony Thomas, which was long and storied, frame for frame, what I came out with is what went on the air for 40 years.
Wow.
With, so at a cost of $2,500. And it was so unique, and Tony had reminded me of this just recently. It's the only time we ever looked at a rough cut of anything and there were 0 notes, none. So what I came out with is exactly what went on the air. And I only discovered recently that in the later seasons, about 3 of the shots were changed. And I was very offended by that. Because I didn't think they were good changes, but that's just me. I'm prejudiced about the whole thing. But it's mine, okay?
You know, obviously the theme of the clip reel that we just saw was the LGBT moments of the show. There are so many ways to dissect the show, but we're talking about that theme. Stan, you showed up in the first season of the show, so you know, here it is. Picture it, 1985. It's the height of the AIDS epidemic. That hit Hollywood hard, I know, and in terms of how people became afraid of gay people suddenly. What was it like to walk into that writer's room and to work with everybody behind the scenes and even possibly get gay episodes on the air?
Terrifying. But people have to remember back then, we were told by our representatives to stay in the closet. So nobody knew we were gay on staff, and some of you have heard the story. And it wasn't until I think our first day on set, and we noticed Estelle come running towards us, and she's like, 3'2", and she's like, "Psst, come here." And we followed her around the back of the set, and she looked at us, me and Jim, my writing partner, and she said, "I know, your secret's safe with me, you're one of us." And I thought she meant Jewish. But she meant gay. She's not gay, but she was probably the first ally ever.
And had
She
such a
played
background
Harvey
in theater.
Firestein's mom in
I
Torch
had
Song
seen her
Trilogy, yeah.
that 2 summers before in Torch Song Trilogy. So she kept our secret. We became very good friends. I'm wearing Estelle ring here now. And we became good friends outside of the show, and she did keep our secret. But I've always wondered, did she ever tell B, because B was such an ally as well. But we were in the room where we couldn't say, people would talk about, what did you do over the weekend? I couldn't say I was dancing in Studio One. And then during the AIDS epidemic, I was living in Silver Lake, and I'd gone to a garage sale. I was telling them about that. I bought some old vintage sweaters, and the room got silent. And they said, "You have to go home and burn those sweaters, because it was probably somebody that died of AIDS, and they were selling his stuff." So that was the climate then. I know you see all these progressive scenes and you think, oh, it's one big gay party there. But we couldn't be who we really were in that group. It wasn't until years later when we were working on our first pilot, and Morton Berry were producing it. And they got to tell us, we always thought you two, or it was never discussed in the writer's room where we were in the writer's room.
Yeah, I think that's one thing to remember. And having interviewed you about this, it's one thing that really struck me, because for those of us who weren't alive or conscious in 1985 of what gay issues were like, it's a two-edged sword, right? One of the reasons this stuff is so progressive is because it is from the late 80s and early 90s, and look how it stands up for the most part, and it's loving. But yet, everybody's human, and everybody was afraid of AIDS, and that could even affected the Golden Girls writers.
Now I think, well, what would have really happened if they found out about us?
Yeah.
Would we have been fired? Would we? I don't know. But it seems so crazy.
Yeah. I was completely in the closet, and I was when I was there. But then the following season, when Wooten and Cherry joined, they were very out. They just came in and said, "This is who we are," and then they, and then it just became less of an issue.
They did. I don't mean to take up time for telling other people's stories, but Mark Cherry did tell me the story that an executive, I think it was at the network, found out that they were both gay, that Mark Cherry and his writing partner, Jamie Wooten, and made a stink of it and said, "We can't hire two gay lovers to write for our show, because what if they break up and they hate each other?" First of all, they weren't even lovers, they were just writing partners. But that's just what people assumed.
But we even had that on Roseanne. The executive producer thought me and my writing partner were off in a room having sex, because they just, in their mind, two gay people, that's just what you do. And I was like, you went to Yale, use your diploma.
But to be fair, this was on Roseanne, where crazy things happen.
That's a whole other panel. with some vodka.
I was closeted for all 7 seasons of the Golden Girls. That wasn't on my bio. But I'll make this brief. There was one morning I walked in on set. Nobody was there except B, who was reading her script, having her coffee, and basically didn't really even know that I was in the room, or so I thought. I got my bagel. I sat down. I'm there, and B looks up from her script, and without any hello, without any introduction, she asked me if I would be interested in something she had picked up on one of her trips, and it was an Indian sari. And I knew what an Indian sari was, but in my closeted, panicked, paranoid brain, all I knew is that at that moment, B. Arthur was offering me a dress to wear around the house. And I wish I had been in a place where I could have said something, to even accept the gift without ever using it, just so I could express to someone, because I knew her reputation, but fear and shame is a big thing.
Do you think that on any level she knew, and that's what this was coming from?
That's what I thought. And I just said, no,
She gave me the sorry award for 10 years. I went on underneath.
I mean, as a gay man, I know how I feel seeing gay jokes, and I happen to love them. They don't bother me, particularly when the gay character gets the upper hand at the end. I'm wondering, the terms were different back then. There wasn't the term transgender, certainly, or at least it wasn't used widely. And the show would often say things like cross-dressing, which is different anyway. But were there parts of you that were happy that that was happening on the show? Were there parts of you that were offended? Like, how did you feel when you would see this happening on your show?
You know, we talked about this a few years back, and I, as a viewer, I would always watch, oh, my old college roommate is in for the weekend, and I haven't seen him in 40 years, and then it would be Jim Bailey, or I got that. I got that that was the nature of the business. The hard part for me was the fact that, unlike your average viewer, I was on stage, and I heard the jokes a lot, and I heard different people laughing, all different kinds of laughs, and that was hard. Was just hearing them over and over. Plus, I appreciate good jokes, and we had the best. That writer's room, that episode, which I think people don't know, won a Writers Guild Award.
Ebb Tide's Revenge, the one with Dorothy's brother Phil dying.
When Dorothy's brother Phil died. And a little side note, that episode, which had Brenda Vaccaro, wasn't supposed to be Brenda Vaccaro. It was originally supposed to be Cher.
Wow.
There you go.
Every time I've heard Isabel tell that story or seen somebody else, there's always a gay gasp and a clutch of the pearls.
The way I understood it was that the script was sent to Cher, and they waited, and the clock just ran out, and we never heard anything.
Cher, what was on your mind, Cher? Tell us.
Chaz.
Jim, had you been involved in any of those discussions or overheard any of those?
No. Waiting for the share call was a big deal at that point. Yeah, absolutely. But Brenda Vaccaro was not too shabby either. She was amazing.
And wonderful. One of the things, when people ask me what's my favorite Golden Girls episode, I mean, it's often the most recent one I've seen. But my most consistent answer is Ebb Tide's Revenge, and it's because I love episodes where you can have your cake and eat it too, in terms of you can tell all the gay jokes you want, because we all want to hear those jokes. I mean, whether you're gay or straight, we know what we say about each other. We know what the jokes are. You want to hear them. And yet you want the gay character or the LGBT character to prevail at the end and have some dignity. And what I love about Ebb Tide's Revenge is we get all of those jokes all the way through, the Teddy and everything. But at the end there's that real, and Estelle does that so beautifully. Just takes it from a comedic moment and just brings it and grounds it, and she cries at the end, and it's just so believable.
That's what the show was so good at. I've always, it was my first show, and so I was like really paying attention. But I said, if characters make an audience laugh, the audience will immediately like those characters and care what happens to that character. And so, we didn't ask, these women to do heavy stuff very often, but when they did, it landed because there was so much goodwill. I mean, I was like, I was choking up, in the back watching, her do that thing. And it's just like such an honest moment.
It is. But the funny thing is, moments before we were choking up at that, we were laughing at, one of the jokes I know was yours, you wouldn't want to park under their oak tree. I love watching episodes
with a shit joke on TV.
I love watching episodes with these writers because you can see who wrote what by how they laugh.
They told us as we were figuring out the tone in season 1, because Facts of Life was down the hall, and they had a very special episode. And they said, don't think of this show like that. Make the stories come from real stories that these women would really experience. And I think that's why it's endured for so many years.
Yeah. That leads exactly into what I wanted to ask you all, which is, I kind of said in the beginning before introducing the clip about why I think the show tackled LGBT issues as many times as it did, because most shows would barely do it once. Why do you think the Golden Girls did that over and over?
I think it's because we knew we had, by the time I got there, we knew we had a gay audience. I mean, you know, they would stop, you know, they would play it in bars across the country and da-da-da. And so we knew that, you know, we had to address, and also be, and all the women, they liked anything that could, you know, I mean, Mark wrote, I don't know what episode, but that panel that we did up in, you know, wherever, a couple months ago. We're just doing panels now.
Are you talking when we went up to Orinda, California, like last year?
Yeah.
They all
This was-
blur.
Yeah, they all blur together. But I remember, you know, Mark Cherry like saying, you know, people coming up to him. I think it was Eptide's Revenge, or when Clayton gets married, and how much that meant. Like, you know, how you just broke through in that generation. And we're talking like 30 plus years ago. But it was a big deal for like middle America to see these women embrace the gay culture.
It was
And that's
also
what
in
they
the
did.
news. I mean, we were going through a gay liberation, so it was something we were all experiencing. So I think that's
I don't know,
why
I
they
didn't
talked.
find out.
Well, you
we
weren't, but
gay
I
until,
was.
like season 5.
Yeah, but every other sitcom writer's room got the same newspapers, and they didn't go for it.
No, we
Because they told us to write from what we were really
How much
experiencing.
of that was Susan Harris?
Yeah, I was gonna say Susan also with so,
Good question.
you know,
Yeah.
and even in the pilot, including a gay character in the pilot. And then I wanted to ask you, Stan, did you pitch the idea for the lesbian episode in season 1?
No, but Susan Harris was not ever in the writers' room. So she supposedly, when I was there season 1, they said she had Epstein-Barr, which
Right.
was
Which is a 2-part 5th season episode.
Sick and tired. That's what it is.
so the weeks that her scripts came in, we couldn't cut anything except for time. So it was like, whew, we can relax that week. But she was never in the room, so I don't think the stories ever came from her. It was, you know, Winnie and more.
Well, I think Paul and Tony, you know, she was still involved in that, and I think
Well, they were in the room, which
Yeah.
was scary.
Yeah.
Because their scary presence. To have the non-writer producers in a room, and they would they knew the importance of the show.
I would say Paul and Tony wrote, you know, especially on soap. I know that they wrote a lot because they told me.
They didn't write on Golden
They didn't
Girls,
write
but-
as much there, no. But by that time, they had like 4 shows going.
But even season 1, but they had to approve everything, and they were
Oh,
in the
yeah.
room. It was so scary. Usually in the writers' room, everybody's pitching all these crazy jokes. But I found in this writers' room, and I was just beginning, so I thought this was how it was. Like Mort would write something on a script and show it to Barry, and if Barry said go pitch it, then they would pitch it. But to me, that doesn't make sense because if I'm across on the table, I don't know what they wrote. So it felt a very confining atmosphere.
I think
in
that's
the
why it
room.
evolved into they didn't really do a room. We'd all have to go
Yeah.
to our office.
Yeah, I always heard that you had to like slide the jokes under,
Yeah.
you know, Kathy and Terry's door.
We had to go
Yeah.
in the room and pitch them in
Oh,
front of the whole group of soap writers. It was freaking scary.
We were so young and nervous, though. We actually did really well with that because they would work on this joke on page 9, and we'd just be me and my partner sitting eating out of styrofoam, and oh, this will be funny. And then when you got one in, it was like, oh my god, you know. And
Must have
called
felt
home.
great. I mean, especially for those of you who started on the show maybe after it had been on for a few years, so you knew how, I mean, you already knew that B was an icon and Betty was an icon, but to hear your words coming out of their mouths must have been
it's
gratifying
crazy.
every time.
Yeah, it was crazy. No, I was doing stand-up. I was in the comedy team. Thank you.
What were you called? The Funny Boys.
Yeah, we're
Funny
we're
Boys.
the Funny Boys. Thank you. Always nice to meet a fan. And so, but you know, my partner and I, you know, we broke up, and so I was just begging for work, and I got stuck on a show with Brian Keith. That prick. And so Heartland, yeah. And I was just like trying to make Paul and Tony, you know, laugh because I knew, you know, down the hall there was a good show happening, and I begged him to get on that. And of course, the Brian Keith show got canceled in like 5 minutes, and I'm sitting in my office feeling bad for myself. But I was really making Paul and Tony laugh the whole time. But I'm sitting in my office and I smoke a joint, I take a little joint out, and Paul comes in his, you know, $10,000 suit and looks at me, and I look at him and I said, What, you just thought I was funny? Well, he laughed and I got the job. But that's how I got that job.
Wow.
And then, you know.
Smoking pot. So
Smoking
kids,
pot.
that's how you get ahead in Hollywood.
But the writing rooms totally changed after that because it became, and the booth became a lot more fun.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I understand Morton Berry and Terry Grossman, who I knew in New York when he was a stage manager for Candide, and he worked for Hal Prince's office, and that's how I knew him from back there. But everybody, you know, it was two totally different things. Chris Lloyd.
Chris
you know,
Lloyd.
and
Who
those-
wrote Scared Straight? He that was his script.
Chris Lloyd
Oh,
wrote.
really?
Okay, I can tell you. I mean, I just pulled it by writer. Okay, Strange Bedfellows, which is the one with Gil Kessler that's running for city councilman.
Uh-huh.
That was Chris Lloyd. The Artist with the reveal of looks like we're a hit. Last look, Chris Lloyd. Scared Straight, which is with Clayton, the first appearance of Clayton, Chris Lloyd. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
So in season
was it
one,
just
he had
luck that
never
it-
written anything. And so they just threw him in our room to watch me and Jim panic. And he just sat on the couch. It was like a play. And we were just like, what the fuck? How did we get here? What are we doing? What's a blow to a scene? We didn't know anything.
Right.
And so he was like a runner. And they said, just go and watch and learn. And then he kept going on with the show.
And then, of course, ended up co-creating and running Modern Family, and
Frasier.
we're working on Frasier, and I mean,
And his father wrote the Chuckles the Clown.
Clown
episode.
American. I mean,
Yeah.
so many. Apart from all of you, so many other people got starts on the Golden Girls. Mitch Hurwitz from Arrested Development, who you worked with.
Yeah.
So it was really a training ground, right?
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, I always, would say, a lot of like let's say, who's the boss? You're writing for Who's the Boss, You write a joke, Tony Danza does it, and it becomes a Tony Danza joke. You can't tell if you've written a good joke or a bad joke, But on Golden Girls, if
He's
B.
my
Arthur,
father.
Oh God. Don't tell him
I
you
like for him.
But if B. Arthur couldn't get a laugh with your joke, you knew you have written a bad joke. Because she would try. She would okay, we're gonna look at that one. Oh, darling, give me one more day, please. That's my spot on B. Arthur.
But that must be comforting as a writer because you really have an absolute barometer. Like, if B can't sell it, that means it's a bad joke.
Yeah, and you just learned, how to write a good character joke, and also, we didn't have to write as many jokes because Betty would do her line, and we'd cut to B, and she'd give her a look, and then you cut to Rick, she'd give her a look. You have these free laughs that would just go on, and
So we came up with that.
Yeah, I know.
Shoot
you
a
came up with
look.
takes. Yeah.
So we literally wrote that in. B shoots her a look. Because we were like, well, how are we going to come up with the joke? And then we realized B. Arthur doesn't need any words. She can just look at her. It was like, well, let's save us an hour of that.
Well, I may respectfully say B. Arthur knew about looks at that point. I don't think you had to. Just one thing. I know you can take a credit for B going, but I think B knew that. That's just me, but I could be wrong.
I love the double letter.
We were fortunate in the early seasons to have some people who really, people in the control room and on the stage who knew how to milk those jokes, who knew how to use the technology to do that. Lex Pazaris,
Lex and Terry.
Gary Shimakawa, Jim Drake, Terry Hughes. They knew how to milk every bit
That
of
line cut that they would do, and I think because we would have the four, cameras in front of us, and Terry had a little clicker to change. You go 2, click, camera 3, click, and you would know this more, Marsha. Those line cuts that they gave, they were pretty good. You didn't have to do a lot of changing and editing, did you?
One of the hardest things was that because B. Arthur would give a look and the audience would laugh for such a long time, that it would put the show over time. So we always had to go into editing and cut the show, because in those days, when you're with the network, you have to deliver a show to the second. Minute, second.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, unlike streaming where they go, oh, just give us what you got, right? So we would have to go into editing. One really great thing that we did, and I don't think any other show did it at the time, was when we shot the first few episodes of the show, obviously with an amazing, our audiences were amazing. We had our audio guy record a separate audio track of our audience only. So that was the only thing that was on that track. We would then give those tracks to our laugh guy. So know that a laugh guy works on all the shows that had live audience, right? And so he had a box full of laughs. But if you remember the show Married with Children, right? That audience was completely different than the Golden Girls audience. So we didn't want their laughs on our show. So every time we needed to cut the show because B. Arthur's look got so long, we had to bridge that cut so it didn't just go, cut like that. We had to tail that laugh, and it was always our audience that we were using for that, which I thought was
But
really
you
cool.
talked about in the beginning, when the audiences came, they didn't know the show because it wasn't on the air, and that as the show got on the air, they knew it more than they had a laugh spread, which is the laughs got longer.
Yeah, as you know the characters, you know why it's funny that B is giving that look, right?
Well, they would show the pilot to the audience on the screen.
Beloved.
And we had so much goodwill. The writing had goodwill from the jump because of Susan's reputation on soap. I always thought that the early seasons of the Golden Girls, at least as the audience was getting to know us, that because of soap, because of the chances that were taken, and Marcia was there for every one of them, knowing there was Maud, knowing there was Sue Ann, even if she was playing a different character, knowing that it was Vivian, we had a lot of goodwill going in.
I wanted to ask how the stories got assigned to particular writers. Would it always be your pitch that you would go off and write? Because, for example, if I look at these episodes, and we just said 3 of them were Christopher Lloyd, I mean, is it by chance that you would get an episode that had a gay theme in it, or would it always have been your pitch?
It would be, you would go into Paul and Tony's office frightening and say, okay, here's my, give us your pitch, kid. And you would do the pitch, and if they said yes, you went off and you had a week to write it, and then you came back and they shot it.
We were so green, we were brought up from New York as staff writers for Wick Thomas, and then they assigned us to Golden Girls, and they already had a story from a writer the previous season, but it was such a gift. The story was such a gift. It was about Rose dating a guy who couldn't get an erection. So it wrote itself. And of course we named him Ernie so we could call it the Impotence of Ignorance.
Yes.
So
clever.
Oh my God.
Excuse me.
He's mad because I said my favorite joke ever was not his. It was Tracy Gamble's.
That's all right.
Well, Jim, I mean, the episode that we saw, Goodbye, Mr. Gordon, with Dorothy, a lesbian, Blanche, a lesbian.
Yeah,
We're going to interview 4 lesbians.
Yeah.
I mean, so does that mean that was your pitch, yours and Gail's pitch?
Yeah, Gail and I went, let's go in and, they have to be lesbians on live TV. And the reason that Bee's got the roses, which I always fought for, was because she's trying to impress a guy in the audience, James Callahan, her old teacher.
Yeah.
And he gives her the roses, and I just thought that was hysterical, having her with the roses.
From a store.
So stupid.
But, I mean, I know that this is something, I'm going to give you a chance to air your grievance about this episode, because I've heard you say it before.
Oh.
What's your grievance about
My
this
grievance
episode?
is, and Marcia and Isabel, just when they go, Dorothy, a lesbian, I said to Nina, I want to see a lesbian under it, right?
Oh, that would have been funny.
Yeah, what?
Like the Beatles on
Yeah, like the
SNL.
Beatles, like sorry, he's married. Yeah, exactly. And Nina didn't do it, and I
That
never
would've been
talked to her
fun.
since. But she'd be like, Nina's like so nice. She would be like, oh, I just B. I don't want to hurt on B. I was like, I love Nina, but come on, man.
That would have been
Am I
funny.
right? It would have been funny.
Yeah.
Yes,
Consolidation from the gay community.
Someone needs to do a remix where we can change that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we should colorize them and turn them into fucking cartoons.
That's all been done.
I know. Well, I mean, like they're doing the shows. They're doing live shows like crazy. And Disney is letting it happen, which I think is great because I can put on Mickey Mouse ears without 5 lawyers up my ass. But, we can do, and I think it's great, and I think it keeps the show alive. Especially when they use the old scripts.
I think Disney is wise enough to know that when people celebrate the Golden Girls, all
Yeah.
it does is make the show more popular, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But they don't say who wrote them when they do them, just so you know.
That's
Well,
true. I mean,
I've been to a few, yeah.
but still, it's not. But they gotta
And
make
yet
it
what's
money.
really funny is that I've done so many interviews and podcasts, and yet there's one question that always comes up.
What's Jim Valley doing now?
Is it true that B. Arthur hated Betty White, or that they didn't get along? And I know that everybody still has that on their mind, so let's just address it and get it out there. When that red light was on, there were no more professional people than those women.
Mm-hmm.
But when the red light was off, those two couldn't warm up to each other if they were cremated together.
Wow.
That's just. B. Arthur used to call me at home and say, I just ran into that C at the
Wow.
grocery store. I'm gonna write her a letter. And I said, B, just get over it, for crying out loud. Just get past it. But yeah, I know she used to call Terry Hughes all the time. And I went over, my husband and I went over to B's house a couple of times for dinner. Within 30 seconds of walking in the door, the C word came out.
Wow.
Oh my God, B, okay, B, get a life. Okay, so.
Joel, did you ever see that among them in the beginning?
No, I never saw that. But you know the trouble I got into. Come back.
Like an article, yeah, right.
But you know the trouble I got into when I reported on that. It's all I said was I was on a plane going to Vancouver, sitting next to B, and she referred to Betty White as a cunt.
Wow.
I had no idea what was going to happen by my doing it. All of a sudden, it was all over. It was on all over the internet. And I didn't know what I was doing. I never knew what a podcast was until then, so I didn't know.
You just recently learned what a cunt was.
We have the.
What was the beef? What was the
Oh, that could take a while to explain. So
My theory was, at the beginning of every show, they'd introduce the ladies, and it was like, would you like to meet the Golden Girls? Yeah, and they played dun 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 dun, and Estelle Getty, and everyone go, yay! Reuben Cunningham, yay! Betty White, yay! B. Arthur, yay!
Oh.
That was my,
Wrong.
Oh.
You don't think so?
No.
But that's how I heard it by the time,
No, remember, B was a theatrical actress.
That was another thing, yeah.
Right?
B,
And
yeah,
Betty was
B,
TV, B was theater.
right.
B hated to do publicity. Okay, she hated also to wash her hair and wear shoes.
She didn't enjoy talk shows.
Yeah,
She didn't enjoy, you couldn't
Oh,
get
yeah.
her, you couldn't get her near a game show.
that's right. And, the show would have continued after 7 years. Their contracts were up and everybody, the executives went to the ladies and Estelle said, yes, let's keep going. And Rue said, yes, let's keep going. And Betty said, yes, let's keep going. And B said, no fucking way. And that's why that show didn't continue, because she wasn't.
And during breaks, Betty would go up to the bleachers and talk.
Right,
Right,
so
yeah.
Betty would
Break the
break
wall.
character
Yeah,
in the
he
middle
did
of the
that.
show, and B hated that.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I was just trying to be cute.
In a slight rebuttal, I like to think, it took me a long time to be the Pollyanna of this group. So I remember the good times. I remember what Betty and B would do for each other. I remember that when it came to LGBT issues, when it came especially
Animals, yeah.
when it came to animals, those two would be in lockstep. There was also a funny thing during the weekly production of the show. we would do we would tape the show twice. We would do one in the late afternoon, then we'd go to dinner, get a bunch of notes. The women would process information at a speed that was unbelievable.
And it was weird because they gave the notes to, no other show I worked on did this. They gave the notes to everybody at the same time.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
They
right.
were in robes.
That's right.
And the little robes.
But when we were done with the dress, what we called the dress show, the late afternoon show, B would not walk over to notes unless she was arm in arm with Betty in their bathroom.
Yeah.
That was because in case as they're walking across the lot and a golf cart, that goes on a lot, gets out of control and
Try to push her in. Yeah, you're right.
I hate to cut us off there, but we're running out of time.
Oh, no.
I know. Believe me, I want to go on longer. I want to set up the surprise that we're going to see, and then also I want to introduce them. I know. So I said we were going to bring it back to Coco, which is the very beginning of the show. As you know, and we referred to it, not only did Susan Harris write this pilot with a gay character, supposedly the network even requested that. So it was unusual in 1985 that a gay character would be written into a show. What ended up happening, and I know that Marcia and Isabel can attest, is that Estelle was so popular in what was supposed to be a recurring role that they decided, okay, we need her full-time. And then they realized 5 full-time characters is too much. This show is already too long with this pilot, and the obvious person to go was Coco. And thematically, I think it makes sense for a variety of reasons why they wouldn't have a house band that they could afford. But
And it was not, no matter what anyone says, had anything to do with the character being gay.
yeah, I know,
Zero.
everybody has attested
And
to that.
the actor was great too.
Charles Lemon.
Coco was
yeah.
great.
Sure.
Well, we're about to see that because what the surprise is. Okay, so as I said, the pilot when it was taped, Marcia, you can say the laugh spread was so long. The pilot was so long. Obviously, they cut it down to an arable length, or what they think is an arable length in 1985, which is longer than now. Right. And then May of 1985 comes around, and they have what's called the network upfronts. And if you don't know what the network upfronts are, and they're becoming a thing of the past very quickly, but they used to be a big deal. Every network, especially the big 3, would have a presentation in New York in May where they would bring in all the advertisers and sell them on our fall schedule and look how great it's going to be. I've heard of this happening just with the Golden Girls and one other time, ironically, with Joey, where NBC was so excited about their new pilot that they not only they didn't just show clips of it in a clip package, they showed the entire pilot to the audience. So they took 20-something minutes of their precious time at the upfront to show the pilot. They did that with the Golden Girls. But what's interesting, and Isabel, you were going to research for me, when the reshoot was done for the Golden Girls, because in order to cut Coco out of the pilot, realizing that that's what needed to be done, they could do some editing, but there were some scenes that just needed reshoots because they couldn't do it just in editing. They'd had to reshoot. So the reshoots were done after the upfront, correct?
Yes. And they were done in the same week that we shot episode 2.
So that would be June or something. So this is the upfront in May. So what we're about to see is clips from a version of the Golden Girls pilot that was shown to that room of advertisers over 40 years ago and has never been seen since. And it includes, this is just clips, not the entire thing, but it includes Coco moments that you will have never seen before because they were cut specifically. So there's some background in Coco's story, and you'll even notice it starts very differently. So before we get to that, Adam, you wanted to say something?
I want to say one thing. Thank you all for coming, and you guys are geniuses, and I can't even believe I'm standing here and that this happened. Frank, Jim, thank you. I'm so nervous. Thank you so much.
Wow. Okay. That was a moment.
Okay, so I'm so embarrassed. My darling husband.
Jim shoots
Mark,
at him a look.
So my husband Mark and I watch The Golden Girls. It's part of our 11 o'clock rotation. We've seen every episode 25,000 times. I know every line, blah blah blah, the whole thing. So the question that I'm going to ask you, because I'm never going to have this opportunity again to have you all in front of me in one room. The question that we always ask ourselves, and I'm sure it's on every gay man's mind that ever saw The Golden Girls: how does Dorothy's Bornak afford Chanel earrings?
You think those are real?
I think she knows where to go on Canal Street, right? She's in New York.
Right?
Yeah. And it's not my main title.
No. So what we're about to see, because again, Marcia, when you made your main title, you were doing it with clips from the first 4 episodes, which had not yet been shot. So you're about to see a main title that's quite different, and you'll recognize immediately why it's different. And then you will see, as I said, Coco moments that have never been seen after May of 1985. Enjoy. Ooh.
How cool.